College was the host of the Future Teachers Academy today, an event that welcomed in high schoolers from around the state interested in the education profession. Keena Mills was there to check it out.
Over 100 Maine high school juniors and seniors took to the classroom Friday for hands-on activities, breakout sessions, and a peek at a career in education.
So it's really an opportunity to take a toe dip into what are these strategies looking like across child development and adolescent development.
According to those at the event, it's the first time in 4 years they've been able to come together for this day, mentioning that under 30 students were at the last one. For education professionals, it's comforting to see the uptick in interest considering what some are calling a teacher shortage in the state.
So what we know from the research is that if we build that bridge between a college-level teacher preparation program and juniors and seniors in high school in particular who are interested or thinking about teaching, that there's evidence that shows that they are much more likely to go into a teacher preparation program.
It was exciting to hear their thoughts and why they wanted to get into the profession, and it was exciting to see that there is a future after us, and that there are people who are very passionate about the field that will stick with the field.
The day had a large focus on hands-on activities while learning important teaching strategies and practices.
That's one of the things that we'll talk about in those breakout sessions is, okay, let's do this fun activity. It's fun. Now let's put on our teacher hats and think about what is this doing for us cognitively, neurologically.
Keena Mills, WABI News, Waterville.